In this suburb of Abidjan, residents are still plagued by a public health crisis nearly 2 decades later.
This is where they dumped the toxic waste, in the trough there. They even dumped it close to people's homes. They even poured it into the neighborhoods.
In 2006, a cargo ship called the Probo Koala arrived in the Ivory Coast, carrying 500 cubic meters of toxic waste. The ship, chartered by Trafigura, was refused by several countries and spent 4 months at sea until finally docking in Abidjan. Its refuse was dumped at around 18 sites in the city.
You could smell the odors, and you could see that you were starting to get nosebleeds, vomiting. I felt pain in my ribcage, with breathing problems. To this day, I've got a cold that never goes away. I have a cold all the time. I always feel ill.
The courts determined that 17 deaths were directly linked to the toxic fumes, and around 100,000 people were poisoned. The director of the Ivorian company responsible for the waste dumping was sentenced to 20 years in prison. But in the end, no one was prosecuted from Trafigura, which settled a financial agreement with the state. A $200 million fund was set up to compensate victims, but many still have not received anything.
The state only paid for those who went to public hospitals. When you went to the public hospital, you lined up and they gave you paracetamol. Given my situation, I decided to go to a private clinic to get proper care. So far, I've had to pay 2.5 million francs. But I've never received anything from the States or from Trafigura.
In September 2023, the African court issued a ruling calling on the state to make a list of the victims and compensate them. But that's yet to happen, so human rights associations are speaking out.
Our first action was to notify the Côte d'Ivoire government of the decision, so they have been informed. The next step for us is to remobilize all the victims so that together we can make the case.
The Ministry of Justice did not respond to our requests for interviews. Meanwhile, the number of civil lawsuits has increased. One case brought before a British court should have enabled Mr. and Mrs. Yapo, along with 30,000 other victims, to each receive around 1,500 euros in compensation for their medical expenses.
My whole body hurts. I can't even lie on my back. I can't do anything with my arms. I used to run a business, but since this happened, I can't do anything.
But some of these funds have been misused. Charles Koffi, president of an association representing the victims, led around 20 of them to Abidjan for another court proceeding. Judges examined the involvement of Société Générale, the bank managing the account Trafigura used to compensate victims.
Société Générale misled investigators by saying that they had already compensated 23,000 victims. We said that since Société Générale compensated 23,000 victims, it should give us the victims' documents, and we'll see. They never responded.
A few weeks later, the case was dismissed. But Koffi plans to appeal and tries to reassure the victims.
You're warriors, so keep your spirits up. We've been fighting this battle for 18 years, but I think the truth will triumph in the end. The case was heard today. It says that Société Générale didn't forge a private document, but that doesn't mean they didn't embezzle the money.
But some good news for the civil organizations finally arrived. Claude Gohuru, a former president of a victims' association, was convicted of embezzling funds.
Here's the decision. This is very good news for the case. The criminal case is closed. There are no longer any legal obstacles to their being ordered to pay back the $4,658 million in civil damages.
Gohuru spoke to us just before the court ruling against him. He pointed the finger at the president of the National Assembly, Adama Bictogo, then Minister for African Integration. A report by the Economic Police in 2012 implicated this close ally of the government, and although he was never convicted, he resigned from his post.
Let Adama Bictogo accept responsibility. Let them put those funds back in place. I think that today there are people who think that justice can only protect them until a certain moment, just for a while.
Adama Bictogo declined to comment. As time goes on, the prospect of one day receiving compensation is becoming increasingly remote for victims.